Take a moment. Take a moment for your spirit. Take a moment to be well. Take a moment to be healthy. Take a moment when you pray. Take a moment for worship. Take a moment every day. Take a moment for your body. Take a moment for your mind. Take a moment for your spirit. Take a moment to be well. Take a moment to be happy. Take a moment when you pray. Take a moment for worship. Take a moment to show you care. Take a moment to show you care. Just to show how much you care. Yeah.
Good evening. It is just after 6 p.m. and we are on another episode of Healing Moments. We want to thank you, those of you who are on Zoom and those of you who are joining us on YouTube. We thank you for joining us each and every week. And as we continue our series this week on trauma, we will open with a word of prayer and our spiritual devotion with Trevor Blyman.
Good evening, everyone. As you would know, for those of you who have been with us during this month, last month and going into this new month, we've been looking at the topic of trauma. What we have discovered so far is that trauma is a byproduct of sin. When God created this world, trauma was not part of the makeup. And we have come to understand that everyone born into this world of sin experiences some form of trauma. This was explained to us by Sister Cherry Sobers when she told us that it affects all aspects of our being. Now, we understand from the Bible that we are mind, we are body, and we are spirit. And traumatic experiences come to us through our mind, our thought processes, through our body physically, and even more so during our spiritual lives. The prophets weren't spared, even though they were inspired by God. Elijah, as we saw last week, as was so beautifully pointed out to us by the doctor, we saw that he was affected by trauma in his life. Moses, the meekest man the Bible described who ever did live, he had trauma in his life. Samson, the strongest man in the Bible, he too experienced trauma. Solomon, the wisest person who ever lived, he also experienced trauma. So trauma doesn't pick favorites. It doesn't leave anyone out. Something like this COVID-19 that is now embracing the world. And Jesus Christ himself experienced trauma as a human being. We saw in the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus was there, and the trauma he felt was when your sins and mine were given to him to drink in that cup. And he said, Father, it's possible that I can pass this. And the Father said, no, you need to go. And he said, nevertheless, not my will be done. Again, we saw him physically being beaten and abused by the Romans until he became so emaciated that a black man was called upon to take that cross all the way to Calvary. And even on the cross, we hear him crying out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? But finally, saying, Father, into thy hand I commend my spirit. What I'm suggesting is that, like taxes and death, trauma is inevitable. However, Jesus offers us peace. He offers us comfort during the traumatic times in our lives. When we go through the fire, he says through one of his prophets, when we go through the flood, he promises to be with us. He extends an invitation to us. Listen to him. Come on to me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. When we accept by faith and through action that invitation, Jesus Christ takes control. We can then, like Job said, though you slay me, yet will I trust you. Or like Jacob, I will not let you go until you bless me. The three Hebrew worthies, we know what they said. Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us. But even if we still will not bow down. What I'm saying this evening is that each of us, as we go through these traumatic experiences, we need to accept Jesus' invitation. He's standing at your door. He's standing at my door and he's knocking. He wants to come in, but he doesn't force himself in. He waits for us to open up so he can come in and deal with these traumatic situations in our lives, these challenges, these tests, these vicissitudes of life that come upon us. So I'm saying this evening, we need to open up. We need to open up and let him in so that his promise of peace, he says, thou will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. So this evening, as you go through those traumatic experiences in your life, please remember that Jesus Christ is the antidote to trauma. He promises to be with you when you go through. He may not necessarily spare you from the experience because that might be a character building moment. But when you go through it, always understand he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And as he was with Moses and Abraham and the patriarchs in the past, he is the same today. He will be with us. So let us pray as we open up our hearts to the presence of the Holy Spirit who leads us into all peace. Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for the promises you have made and that you will keep. Peter says that you are not slack concerning your promises, but you keep your promises. You have promised to keep us in perfect peace. You have promised to give us your peace. Trauma will come. It has come. It is here. But you do not want us to despair. You have overcome the world and you want to grant us unto us. So may we open up our hearts by surrendering self so we can be filled with the Holy Spirit. And we look at the fruit of the Spirit and we see their love. We see joy and we see peace among the 9 attributes of love. May we this evening, as we open up to the presence of the Holy Spirit, recognize indeed that you can and you will be with us. So let us face these traumatic experiences with confidence that you who promise would fulfill it. Hear our prayer for Christ's sake. Amen and amen.
Take a moment for your body. Take a moment for your mind. Take a moment for your spirit. Take a moment to be well. Take a moment to be healthy. Take a moment when you pray. Take a moment for worship. Take a moment every day. Take a moment for your body. Take a moment for your mind. Take a moment for your spirit. Take a moment to be well. Take a moment to be happy. Take a moment when you pray. Take a moment for worship. Take a moment to show you care. Take a moment to show you care. Just to show how much you care. Yeah.
We want to thank you for staying with us. Again, a very special welcome to each of you on Zoom and those of you who are on YouTube. Now, last week we had our special guest speaker, Dr. Karen Abdul, and this week she is back with us to speak to us again on trauma. We had some very interesting discussions last Thursday by Dr. Abdul, and she is back once again, and I can't wait to hear her perspective on this trauma session this week. Now, once again, she's asking those of you who are able to turn your cameras on so that she can speak to us directly, as she likes to see our facial expressions. So here we go. Dr. Abdul, you can go now. We seem not to be able to hear you, Dr. Abdul. Still not hearing you. It's suggested that you might want to change your microphone. Okay, while we work those technical issues out, Dr. Abdul, maybe Dr.
Can you
Duffy
hear
can.
me?
Yes, we can hear you now. You can go right ahead.
I remember the first time that I was exposed to someone with severe mental illness. And this actually did not happen when I was in medical school or when I was in residency. It happened when I was about 12 years old. And we went to the house of a good friend of my mother's. And this person lived in a very affluent place in Trinidad. It was well known for people who were wealthy. They had, really large houses, beautifully decorated, and hers absolutely fit the bill. It was no less than any of the others. And so we walked into this pristine house, gorgeously decorated, and bigger than any house I had ever been in my life to that time. And she came out wearing a robe and with bedroom slippers on her feet and her head wrapped in a wrap. And she was holding a Bible and she had the Bible open to the Psalms. And she kept pointing and making this motion with her fingers. And she walked out and she said to my mom, Jackie, God has been telling me to read this psalm. He's been telling me to read this psalm. And I haven't done it, and he's going to punish me. He's going to punish me. This is why God is punishing me. And my mother, being the good nurse that she was, immediately did what I think most of you would do. She started to reason with her friend and say, no, God is not going to punish you because you didn't read this psalm. That's not who God is. He's a loving God. He cares about your life. He wants you to be whole. He's not going to punish you. And it didn't seem to matter what my mother said. She kept pacing, and I'll never forget it. She was in her dining room, pacing back and forth in front of her dining table saying, no, Jackie, no, you're wrong. God is going to punish me. God is going to punish me. I'm supposed to read this psalm. A couple of weeks later, we returned to the house because my mom had gotten a call that this woman had committed suicide. And I did not know it at the time, but what I was seeing was an example of a psychotic depression with hyper-religious themes. This woman had been in a domestic violence situation in that beautiful, pristine home. In fact, when my mom went to visit the home after she died, I remember her commenting to another one of her friends, and I happened to overhear because like every good 12-year-old, I was very curious. And so I happened to overhear her saying to someone else, no one is visiting him because they knew what he did to her. Had this woman gotten the intervention she needed, she could have been alive today. And so
my focus this evening is helping us to understand not just what trauma can look like, but what we should do. Because often what we do is feel overwhelmed and act out of the way we feel, as opposed to the way that we should. I do have a presentation and I would like to share it. Now, this presentation goes through a lot, okay? And I have spoken about some of this last week, but this is, the feel of this presentation is going to be a little bit different because I will be teaching today. And I am asking that people put their cameras on so that I can understand, because the pace at which we go is determined by how much you understand and how well you understand it. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, so if people can please put on your cameras, we will begin. So post-traumatic stress disorder, commonalities in traumatized populations. So we had spoken last week about a few of the things that I'm talking about again this week, and I wanted to review them with you. There is individual trauma, which causes dysregulation of the entire physiology of the body. And remember, I had said before that it's not just the mind, it's a dysregulation of a physical organ, which is your brain. And it's dysregulation of your immune system, and it's dysregulation of the way your body metabolizes things. And it causes whole body dysregulation. Collective trauma in societies. What does that mean? I'm going to go a little bit more into detail on that. Last week, I mentioned how this disrupts families. This week, let's talk about it. When a parent is traumatized, that parent tends to traumatize the child in different ways, either by withdrawing, by becoming more pressured towards the child, by in turn abusing the child, or by not being able to set limits. And many times what that causes is a disruption in bonding and in attachment. So what is the difference between bonding and attachment? So a child attaches to the parent. The process by which the child begins to internalize the parent as a safe space and see them as a foundation for their life is called attachment. The process by which the parent loves the child, learns to love the child, because parents have to learn to love their children. And everyone here who has children knows that. Some people learn to love them, while mom was pregnant. Some people learn afterwards, but every parent learns to love their children. And when they do, that process is called bonding. If a parent cannot bond well with a child, the child will not attach well. Are you all understanding?
Yes.
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 Okay. And so ruptured attachment is generated by ruptured bonding, because the child is coming into an environment that they know nothing about. Okay. And the parent is the one who fosters that attachment. So, you know, whatever it is you're doing, if you're breastfeeding, if you can't breastfeed, but you're bottle feeding and you're staring at baby, you know, you're paying attention, you're, you know, making sure baby is well cared for and demonstrating love to baby. Baby is going to attach and attach. This person is reliable. And there is a critical importance to imparting that emotional connection to children. In fact, children who do not get that emotional connection can actually fail to thrive. And for those of us who are not medical, like the good doctor who I see over here, for those, yes, there she is. For those of us who are not medical, failure to thrive can result in the death of an infant. It means the infant can stop eating, they can stop feeding well, they can stop growing, they can stop developing at the normal rate at which they develop. And so children have actually died, and there have been horrific cases of like abuse at daycares and things like that. I remember one case that we had at Howard, which was really, really sad, of this little baby girl who the parents dropped her off at daycare and they thought everything was fine. And it turned out that at daycare, all they did was leave her in a crib with a blanket over the top. And the only time they opened it up was when they fed her. And the child died not because she wasn't eating, but because of the lack of stimulation for like 8 hours a day. She died. And so that's the importance of bonding and attachment. When parent is traumatized, the bonding attachment cycle is disrupted. And that in turn causes stress in the child. And when the child is stressed, the child then exhibits certain behaviors, which then project themselves into the society. Make sense? And project themselves into the family. Okay, let's see. Oh, wow, we have a lot of people. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, I beg of you, I'm seeing some people nodding, but most people still have their cameras off. If you all could please put them on so I can see that you're following me. That would be fabulous. Okay, so when we talk about complex trauma, we are talking about trauma that begins with an individual, continues with family rupture. And when this rupture happens between parent and the child acts out, that acting out is directed at siblings, cousins, grandparents, everybody, right? Because children don't really have a voice. They don't know how they're finding their voices as they go along. So the way they speak is by disruption. That's their voice. And so what ends up happening is thank you, I've seen other people putting their cameras on, I appreciate it. What ends up happening is you have a situation where the teacher at school will call and say, Johnny did whatever, he threw a stone at Sue. And we don't understand what's going on with him. And then the parent says, oh yeah, he's a really bad boy at home and he's always fighting with his sister and then the child is then punished for acting out. And the reasons for the acting out are often not explored. Okay, so by the time that child is a teenager, that child is ready to, blow up the world. Now, how this manifests at large in societies, we went through a little bit of it. We went through the health burden, the increased health burden because of comorbid illness. But there's also a social burden that we didn't discuss. A traumatized community actually has a microculture of its own. So I'm not sure how things are in Barbados right now. I have been hearing rumors, well, not rumors, I've been hearing from people that there's an increase in crime in the country. Is that true? I'm looking to see whether people are nodding or shaking their heads. Is that true or is it a rumor? There's an increase in crime. You know, someone told me that someone was shot in the street in broad daylight. This is a friend from Barbados who lives in the United States, that these are things that the country had never seen before.
Mm-hmm. And daylight bank robberies.
There we go. All right. So when these things start happening in the society and these things are witnessed, this causes fear. And fear is a tremendously disruptive force in the family. Because when parents act in fear about their children, and this is not about parents being bad parents. These parents are good people wanting to do right by their kids. And they act in fear and they act in terror. And it's disruptive. And kids come as they grow up to understand why it happened. But at the time that it's happening, children are stressed. They are stressed. So it is a very complex situation. And from the time of the traumatic insult, so let's say Barbados was to end the crime spree in 2022. For those who witnessed these acts of violence, it takes about 5 generations to heal. So the longer this goes on in the community, the longer the healing is going to take.
Mm.
Here are some of the things that cause collective trauma. We know about war, we know about territorial issues, we know about slavery, you know, and the trajectory of the Caribbean. Whenever I speak to people from the Caribbean, I have to speak very differently from the way I speak to the African American community, because in the Caribbean, we were fortunate enough to have those who were perpetrating violence, by and large, move out. And so the insult was able to end to a certain point. We were able to start healing as a community, meaning we started developing our own justice system. We started developing our own political system, our own judicial system, our own law enforcement, with people who look like us, who were not, who did not have the agenda of the oppressive group. And so we were able to, after generation, effect more and more healing. Now what's happening in the Caribbean, because it's happening in Trinidad as well, and in other places in the Caribbean, is that there is now a new threat, and that is the threat of gang violence, which is, now that we have gone through our 5 generations of healing from slavery, are getting back to that traumatized state. And that is why it's so imperative, and I don't know what the Bajan government is doing about this, but it's imperative that this end as quickly as possible. Otherwise, it will undo all of the work that the Caribbean has done to heal after the horrific effects of slavery. So yes, civil war, territorial issues, international conflict, political persecution, gang violence, poverty, racism, gender violence. All of these things stress the society. And when someone has post-traumatic stress disorder, these are the criteria. This is what we consider when we are screening for post-traumatic stress disorder. Number one, did this person directly experience trauma? Number two, did they directly witness trauma? So the people who were robbed in the bank, or the people who witnessed a man being shot in the street, are at risk for post-traumatic stress disorder. Exposure to details of a traumatic event perpetrated on a close relative. Repeated indirect exposure to traumatic events. For example, professionals working with traumatized populations, so such as myself. And I think I shared it with you all briefly. I mentioned it briefly last week that I went through my own traumatic stress because I was working with refugee and asylee populations from areas where people had experienced horrific violence. But you are also at risk. When someone is shot in the street and then it's on the news and the images are on the news and it's being played over and over again, and there are all of you're exposed repeatedly to what happened in what was a previously very peaceful, very safe place where you really have no tools to deal with this. Everyone is at risk. Are we following?
All the time.
Okay. I went through these last week, so I'll mention them briefly. Post-traumatic stress disorder, the features, and I'm sure you all must have talked about this already: nightmares, flashbacks, dissociation, derealization. If anybody doesn't remember what these are, just stick your hand up in the chat and I'll explain them. Hypervigilance, or always being on guard, avoiding, prolonged distress after reminders of the trauma, negative emotions, negative thoughts, anger, irritability, sadness. I am bad. The world is not safe. And I want to pause here for a little while, because with post-traumatic stress disorder, there are several comorbid issues. And when I say comorbid, I mean other mental illnesses that are very closely linked to post-traumatic stress disorder. Major depressive disorder is one of them, okay? And major depressive disorder is characterized by a lot of these negative emotions: anger, irritability, sadness, loss of energy, loss of motivation, feelings of what we call apathy. Does anybody know what that means, apathy? Okay, I'm looking.
Yeah.
Yes? Right. So people who enjoy, there's certain things that you enjoy doing. If you enjoyed singing on the praise team, enjoyed gardening. I know a lot of our gentlemen garden.
Sorry.
Hello? Okay. Yeah, I know a lot of our gentlemen like to go in the garden. If you're not interested in doing things you were interested in doing before, that's considered apathy. And it's actually a cardinal sign of major depressive disorder, meaning apathy is one of the most important indicators we have that someone is depressed. The other one being suicidal thoughts. Those two things. If someone has one of those two things, major depressive disorder is at the top of our differential of their diagnoses. Another interesting thing about depression is anger is a feature of depression that is more readily exhibited by men than by women. And the reason for this is social. Women are allowed to be sad. They're allowed to cry. For men, that's viewed as a negative characteristic. So men become angry the vast majority of the time. While for women, there's a mix of features. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So when you have a spouse who is becoming irritated and short and angry, yes, they could be a psychopath, but they could be depressed. Consider it, okay? Another feature, and I don't have it listed here, I may have it further on in the talk, is substance abuse. And I said last week, I'm repeating it this week. Trauma is a drug dealer's paradise. People engage in substance abuse when they have post-traumatic stress disorder, when they are depressed, when they have other anxiety disorders, when they have psychotic illness. People engage in substance abuse to cope. And these thoughts, the thought that the world is not safe, it's an incredibly burdensome thing to walk around believing that essentially the world is not safe. I can be killed at any moment. I cannot trust anyone. People want to get away from those thoughts. And so they engage in substance abuse. We talked about this last week, the dysregulation of the entire body. Okay. Oh, here it is, substance abuse. And all of these comorbid illnesses that come with it. So these figures, the body mass index, it's a ratio of weight to height. And these are the weight statuses. Below 18.5, body mass index is underweight. 18.5 to 24.9 is normal. 25 to 29.9 overweight. 30 and higher obesity. And there's another number there that I didn't put in, but that number is 40. When somebody has a body mass index over 40, they are considered morbidly obese. In the United States, a body mass index of 40 is a criteria for someone to have bariatric surgery. And so a lot of our patients ended up having bariatric surgery because they were so obese. Okay. Here are the trauma risk factors: workplace bullying, violence, gender violence, early life displacement, war violence. Hypertension and heart disease. Do people have a good sense of what hypertension actually is? Yes? Yes. Okay, good. So so you know what I'm saying here. The force of the blood pushing against the walls of the blood vessel is too high. There's damage to the walls. There's buildup of LDL cholesterol and causes plaque, and that can block the arteries. We've all heard of this because we are good Seventh-day Adventists, and we all know what is new start, right? It's supposed to mitigate all of this. Okay, so these are some of the articles. There are a lot of studies, meta-analyses involving like 112,700 people who had experienced, different types of violence in childhood and had obesity. Hemingson's obesity review, forum or adverse childhood experiences can do this. Heart disease, race and ethnic differences, neighborhood stresses, and hypertension prevalence, all of these things will stress. So what to do? Well, I will tell you what is the first thing you should do. The first thing you should do is, if you think something is wrong, it is. Okay, let me see. There we go. There are a few other people who turned on their cameras. Thank you. So do you hear me when I say, if you think something is wrong, it is. So let's go back to the story I shared right at the beginning. Here's a woman who is vulnerable because she's in a domestic violence situation, who is saying to you, a spiritual person, a person of God, that God is going to punish her because she's not reading Psalm, I can't remember which Psalm it was, but she's not reading this particular Psalm. To how many people does that seem like something's wrong? Just stick your hand up. There we go. Let me see. Yep, everybody. Okay. Now, hyperreligiosity it's a thing. It's an actual thing in psychiatry. Hyperreligiosity is exactly that. And for those of us who are part of the religious community, we understand hyperreligiosity in a way that our friends and colleagues who are atheists do not, because they could consider anything hyperreligiosity, but we understand clearly what is within the norms of thought for a religious group. So if you think there's something wrong, it is. Make sense? So now there's something wrong. What do you do? And this is where people make a critical mistake. They try to argue with a disease. And that is an exercise in futility. Okay? Arguing that my mother's friend should not think like that is just about as good as arguing that a paper cut shouldn't hurt. It's about as effective. Make sense? Makes sense. Good. I'm looking. Yes. It's about as effective. It's about as effective as arguing with cancer while it's metastasizing in your body. Never argue with a disease, ever. So if you feel like something is wrong, what's the first thing I have here? Get help. Get help. Who can help? I'm sorry, is our pastor, is the pastor of the church online today? Are the elders online today?
I'm here as one elder. I'm not too sure if other elders are on.
Okay, so one of the elders is on. So I do trainings with pastors and elders because unfortunately, and your pastor will probably testify to this, pastors, 90% of pastoral training equips them to do about 10% of the work they do. And pastors are unfortunately not trained in recognizing mental illness. So chances are what my mother did, and my mother was a nurse, which was try to argue with the disease, is something the pastor would also do. That's why pastoral training is critical. I train elders to recognize these things, because at that point in time, what you need to do is enlist the help of a professional. Call a doctor. Call the ambulance. Call a psychiatrist. Do not ever try to handle this on your own, because these are potentially fatal illnesses. And the psychiatric burden, there's a graph I show when I make these presentations, you know, do the weekend seminars. There's a graph that I show that demonstrates the morbidity and mortality rates in people who have psychiatric illness and the years of productive life loss. It is a little bit less than a quarter. It occupies a little bit less than a quarter of the pie chart of all the illnesses, all the illnesses. It represents a major chunk of people who die and who are disabled. So this is not something to play around with. Get help, okay? Here is what not to do. Do not tell the person to pray more. For heaven's sake, please don't. Not because prayer is not good, not because prayer is not effective, but because at that point in time, their prayer life is not the central discussion. Okay, if somebody got COVID and somebody said, oh, please pray more while they were trying to breathe, it would sound not just ridiculous, but completely heartless, right? This person is gasping for air and you're saying, well, pray more. Doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make any sense, not because prayer is not effective, but because at that point in time, praying is not the central issue here. Whether the person prays or not is not the central issue. The central issue is that this person can't breathe and you need to get their airway open. Okay? So do not tell somebody who sounds like there's something deeply, deeply wrong that they need to pray more. It's not the central issue. All right? Do I sound like a heretic to anyone? I hope not. I hope not. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Thank you. This is not about prayer. It's not about the power of prayer. This is about what needs to be done.
At that time.
At that point.
Yes.
Okay? So do not tell the person to pray more. Do not tell the person to have more faith. Tell them, listen, I'm going to tell a trusted family member what's going on with you, and we're going to get you to the doctor. That's what we're doing. Okay? What if you think something is wrong, but you're not sure? That is where a lot of people get stuck. And they get stuck because people want to make sure that their alliance, and alliance is a term that we use for it in psychiatry, but your own bond, your own connection with the person that you care about is preserved. And a lot of the times people believe that if they effect these interventions, the person is going to hate them. Or the person is going to think they got into my business. Or the person is going to think, oh my gosh, they got me locked in a psych ward. Okay? And the person is going to be angry for the rest of their lives. Let me tell you something. It's better to have an angry friend or family member who is alive than a dead friend or family member who has no feelings. Okay? Because if they're alive, you guys can work it out. If they're not, that's it. Make sense? One of the challenges that we have is people don't know how to ask about things like suicidality. So people see, okay, there's something wrong, there's something wrong. And they pause and they don't they don't ask. And one of the questions I get most often is, how do I talk to someone about it? And there is no other way to do this than to ask. Are you being hurt? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you hurting yourself? We do first aid for mental health, for lay people, for elders, for pastors. It is important that, as difficult as it is, you ask that question. Ask the question. Don't beat around the bush. One of the things I have often admired about my Bajan friends and family, because I don't know if you all know this, but Sister Gloria Josiah, some of you might know her. I don't know. Sister Gloria Josiah is my aunt. Her husband, Pastor John Josiah, was president of East Carib. So I claim Barbados. My grandmother's, my great grandfather was actually Bajan. He migrated to Trinidad. He was a policeman and migrated to Trinidad. But also Barbados is the first place I visited. I visited my cousins when I was like 6 months old. So I claim Barbados just a little bit. And one of the things that I have always admired about my Bajan friends and family is that y'all are straight shooters. For the most part, a Bajan will tell you the truth, for the most part. This is the time to employ that quality, brothers and sisters. Ask a direct question. Do you feel like taking your life? And if that person says yes, say to them, we are going to a doctor. Okay? Do not leave that yes in a state of suspended animation. Do not try to discuss the yes. Do not try to negotiate with the yes. Do not, because that's negotiating with an illness, and you cannot do that. If that person says yes, say, I am taking you to a doctor. Unequivocally. Okay? So in terms of what to do, are we clear on those emergency situations? Yes, no, maybe? Okay. All right. Now that we're done with the emergencies, and if you don't hear anything else I said, if everything else I said put you to sleep in this talk, please remember the emergency situations, okay? Because you are saving someone's life, literally, okay? Other things to do. If someone is suicidal, ask about weapons. Ask about weapons in their home. Okay, I see somebody, people are talking. Do people have questions? Do people have, what's going on? Huh?
In Barbados, you should ask about Gramoxone because that's the favorite.
Gramoxone?
Mm-hmm. It's a weedicide. Paraquat. That's the favorite.
Okay.
So,
ask about it and take it away. There's a lot there. Everybody's an armchair psychiatrist these days. You know, it's I spent, I don't know why I spent 4 years in medical school and then 4 years doing psychiatry when I could have just sat on Google and everybody's an armchair psychiatrist, and a lot of people have all of these opinions. If somebody's gonna kill themselves, then they're insisting on killing themselves, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't prevent it. That is absolutely false. That is absolutely not true. And the overwhelming evidence demonstrates that if you can interrupt the act of suicidality, the person is grateful, and a few minutes later is happy that they did not complete suicide. So if you can interrupt that act and just give the person some time to step back and think, You have literally saved their life. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I don't know what the statistics are like in Barbados. My guess is they ring true pretty much everywhere in the world. In the United States, there are very clear statistics that women, and I'm trying to remember, if I said this before and I'm boring you all, let me know. But women are 3 times more likely to attempt suicide than men. Men are twice as likely to complete suicide. Did I mention this? No, I didn't mention.
No, you didn't. You didn't.
I didn't mention this.
No.
Men are twice as likely as women to complete suicide, even though women are 3 times as likely to attempt. Do you know why? Because, and let me show you it here. Oh, yes. Yeah, because when women attempt suicide, they overwhelmingly attempt suicide by overdose. When men attempt suicide, they overwhelmingly attempt suicide by gun violence or by hanging. And so it is easier to interrupt a woman's suicidal attempt than it is to interrupt a man's. So when we say take away the guns, you see, in the United States, they don't like the psychiatrists to talk at all, because we say take away the guns, and that will solve a lot of the problem of homicide and suicide and all of this stuff. But they don't like that. It's a political talking point. But when we say take away the guns, it is because there is solid data. So I'm going to show you some of these graphs. I'm stopping sharing the first one, and I'm going to start sharing the second one. Okay? So here we go. So this is what I'm talking about, the worldwide disease burden, psychiatry versus others. So here we go. So we talk a lot about cancer, right? We talk about respiratory illnesses, cardiovascular illnesses. You know, in the Adventist church, we love to discuss what to do about heart disease and cancer and diabetes and whatnot, right? We love. Look at the worldwide disease burden, disability costs, financial. What is at the top of the list? Top of the list. Significant, look, bigger than cancer, bigger than cardiovascular illness, bigger than injuries. When they say respiratory, we're talking about like effects of smoking and things like that and other respiratory illnesses. Look at that sliver of the pie compared to psychiatric illnesses. And yet we will talk all day and have 20-something different seminars. Look at the shortened life expectancy, psychiatric disorders versus smoking. How many seminars, ladies and gentlemen, has the church had on smoking? How many smoking cessation seminars has the church had in your lifetime? 10,
Plenty.
15?
Plenty.
Plenty, right?
Mhm.
We are breaking, here we're not even talking about collective psychiatric disorders. Here we are breaking them down, right? Into the sum of their parts. Schizophrenia is one very specific psychotic disorder. There are many psychotic disorders. They're talking just about schizophrenia, just about bipolar disorder, which is a specific mood disorder, major depressive disorder, which is another very specific mood disorder. Look at where smoking comes. Do you see what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen? But everybody in the Adventist church has heard that smoking kills, right? Everybody has heard that smoking kills.
Absolutely.
How many people have heard that schizophrenia kills, that bipolar disorder kills, that major depressive disorder kills? We hear about smoking and we hear about substance abuse. And we don't nearly hear about substance abuse as much as we do smoking. Okay.
And red meat.
And red meat. We hear about red meat, right? And vegetarianism, and people have all these arguments about whether you should be vegan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we don't hear about mental disorders. So I'm begging you all to shift your perspective to understand that these are potentially fatal illnesses with significant years of life lost. People with bipolar disorder have high rates of suicide. With schizophrenia, they have high rates of suicide. In fact, so does anybody know Donnie Hathaway? Do you know who Donnie Hathaway is? He sang This Christmas.
Yes.
Yes. Donnie Hathaway, his daughter is Layla Hathaway. He had schizophrenia. And the way he died is that he stopped taking his medication because, like many people, he felt that the medication was a crutch. He stopped his medication, became psychotic, and fell from, I can't remember how high up, but he jumped out of a window and died because he became paranoid, which is what a lot of schizophrenic people, they become paranoid, they become really terrified, and they run, they flee. I've treated schizophrenic people who jumped out of windows because they saw something, they thought it was gonna hurt them, and they were running away and didn't know how to get away. For the most part, schizophrenic people are frightened and running. But that's a different discussion. Yes, potentially fatal illnesses. And yet, look at how much money, how much financial support other illnesses get versus mental health. So no financial support, no focus in the church, in the community, nothing. And then there's the stigma, which I'm glad that you all are trying to mitigate against, right? And then I'm going to show you this graph. This is data courtesy of the Center for Disease Control in the United States. I have not seen the data for Barbados, okay? But this, you see this? This is the reason we take weapons away. 56.6% of completed suicides by men were done by firearm. 56.6%. That is a staggering number. So ask if someone is suicidal. Ask if they have a gun. Ask if they have that weedicide. Say it again, please. It's
Gramoxone.
Ask if it's in their house. Ask a family member to go and get it and take it away. Okay? Ask what they might be thinking about doing. Because people will tell you, I'm thinking about walking into traffic. I'm thinking about slitting my wrists. I thought about taking a belt and hanging myself. People will tell you, they will tell you. All right, maybe, have I beat this horse enough? I don't know what else I could possibly say. Please ask. And when you ask, get the person to a hospital. What else can you do? Okay? I'm sorry, we were talking about suicide risk. So I am going to stop sharing, and we'll get into all of the discussions that people love to have. First discussion, should you see a psychiatrist or not? If somebody has a severe mental illness, absolutely. In fact, I would suggest that you be assessed by a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist can help you make a plan. And that plan could be, hey, you know what? Your disease is severe enough that you need medication and you need support and you need therapy, or your disease is a bit milder and it would be helpful for you to have a therapist. And that's fine, because like every other illness, there's a range of severity to any mental illness. Even schizophrenia, even bipolar disorder, we hear about the extremes, but quite frankly, there's a range. And there are people who have schizophrenia who go to work every day and they're productive members of society, and they hear voices and they live with them and they get married and they have families and they carry on with life. And then there are other people who are so severely disabled that they have to live in a group home and they can't manage anything. They have to have somebody there with them. Okay. So there are some people who can go to therapy and who, if you have a discussion with them and say, change your eating habits and exercise or whatever, they have the energy to do that. They can get it done. And then there are other people whose disease is severe enough that they need more. They need medication. Okay. They may need closer care. All right. They may need to see the therapist and the psychiatrist, and see the therapist every week and see the psychiatrist every 2 weeks, and get some intensive help. And all of this is valid. None of it means that somebody is better or worse than anybody else. That's like saying somebody who has diabetes and has to take metformin is a better person than somebody who has diabetes and has to take an injectable insulin. That may, if I contextualize it like that, it makes no sense, right? Like, how is one person better than the other? No, they're not. One person has less severe disease. They can take an oral medication, go about their business. The other person has more severe disease. They have to take the injectable insulin and they have to get checked by a podiatrist to make sure they don't have cuts. They are in danger of gangrene and losing their feet. And we know how this goes with diabetes, right? Losing your eyes and whatnot. Okay. But nobody's better than another person. That is the first space in which we have to bring people who have mental illness. It's a clear understanding wherever you are in this illness, that is the intensity of the treatment that you need. Okay? So yes, I am in favor of medication. Yes, I am in favor of echinacea. Yes, I am in favor of chamomile tea and melatonin if you want to sleep. Yes, I am a Trini. We have a bush tea. It is not a division from bush tea for you to have to take Zoloft and bush tea. Okay, these things are not competing with each other. Okay, got it? That's my perspective. Y'all can argue, but that's my perspective. So yes, if somebody needs medication, please don't make them feel ashamed of it. Please don't make them feel like somehow this is a lack of faith in God, that they have to take medication. Please have the prayer. Oh man, yes, and it's time to stop. It is 7:16. I apologize. Please, the prayer, the spirituality, the support of the church, everything is needed. In fact, people who do best with mental illness have a combination of medication, therapy, and social support. Social support is a critical part of surviving mental illness. And so you as a church, your attitude, the energy that you bring to this person, visiting them the way you would visit Sister so-and-so if you heard that she had cancer, visit somebody, okay? If you hear that they are depressed. I'm going to close now. Are there any questions? Questions?
Yes,
music
we have one in the chat, and that says, what about those who don't want the help?
So here's the thing. If somebody does not want help, they don't want help. In the United States, we have a system by which psychiatrists can take away the rights of someone if it's going to protect them or someone else. I don't know what the system is in Barbados. In the United States, we can sign a document. If we are convinced that if we let somebody leave the emergency room, they will go home and kill themselves or kill someone else, we can sign a piece of paper that says they have to stay until they're deemed safe for themselves or someone else. So that's one time that we can intervene. If you all can find out, Dr. Dupuy, if you all can find out what happens in Barbados, I think that would be really, really helpful. Another issue is mandated reporting. In the United States, physicians are what we call mandated reporters. So are teachers, so are actually pastors and elders. They are mandated reporters, meaning if you know that a child is at risk of being harmed or witnessing a situation in the home where they might be harmed, you can inform the authorities, or you are mandated to inform the authorities and initiate an investigation. And so that is another way where if somebody does not want help, they get help. I've actually had several people who are alcoholics and whatever and abusing their families. Actually, that kind of intervention was the impetus to stop doing that kind of thing. Again, what it looks like in Barbados is really important because it's not relevant what it's like in the United States. It's relevant what it's like in Barbados. But there is, I'm sure, some kind of measure in place where if someone is imminently at risk, either of hurting themselves or someone else, or at risk of being hurt, there is a way to get them out of the situation. Unfortunately, many people don't rise to that level of acuity, and they refuse help. And if someone refuses help, there's nothing I can do as a psychiatrist. If one of my patients comes to me and says, forget it, I'm not taking these medications anymore, this is all baloney, there's literally nothing I can do but let them walk out of the office. So I wish I had better news, but you cannot force someone who doesn't want the help unless they're in imminent danger.
Mm-hmm.
Someone said, given a flight risk, should an individual attempt driving someone to the hospital, or what might be a better option to helping a person get help? I call 911. I don't drive people to the hospital. I call 911. What's the emergency number in Barbados?
311, 211 for police,
Mm-hmm.
311 and 511. So
which one is the
ambulance and fire. As the patients, I keep forgetting that one. I know it's 211 for police, and I keep forgetting the others. 511 is ambulance. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So 511. There you go, Michelle Arthur. Thank you, Michelle. 511 is when you call the ambulance, the ambulance comes, they are obligated to bring this person. Okay, it's a much easier situation if you have emergency medical personnel on the scene to help you. So 511, everybody remember that number. Other questions?
We don't have any more.
If you think of more, because I know my talk wasn't that good. I know people are going to come up with questions. Please write them down. They can WhatsApp to me or email me. That is perfectly fine. If you think of other questions, if you think of situations, if you have a scenario that you're struggling with and you don't want to bring it here in the group, please send it to me. I promise to be better about checking my WhatsApp, and I will respond. Okay. Alrighty, thank you so much. It has been amazing to be here and to talk with you all. And it's always my pleasure. I appreciate being asked. And I will sign off now.
We want to thank you, Dr. Abdul, for joining us for the past 2 weeks on our talks about trauma. We do hope that in the future we have other programs coming up that you will lend your voice to our programs, because it has been insightful and it has been very educational. So thank you so much. Now, we want to thank those of you who have been joining us week after week for Healing Moments. Unfortunately, our time is up, but join us again next Thursday at 6 p.m. for Healing Moments. Until then, do have a great night. Thank you.
Night. Bye-bye. Awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome.
Take a moment for your body. Take a moment for your mind. Take a moment for your spirit. Take a moment to be well. Take a moment to be healthy. Take a moment when you pray. Take a moment for worship. Take a moment every day. Take a moment for your body. Take a moment for your mind. Take a moment for your spirit. Take a moment to be well. Take a moment to be happy. Take a moment when you pray. Take a moment for worship. Take a moment to show you care. Take a moment to show you care. Just to show how much you care.